My father disappeared for 20 years. Now he's back with a big inheritance, but only if I take care of his dying wife. He vanished when I was 8 years old. One day he was there, laughing on the couch with us while we watched cartoons, and the next day, he was gone. No note, no explanation, not even bothering to pack his stuff. My mom tried to pretend she was strong for a while, but she just grew more and more bitter. And I grew up hearing that he was a coward, an irresponsible man who abandoned his own family to live who knows what kind of life. For 20 years, I thought he was dead. It was easier to believe that than to imagine he chose to live away from us, until he showed up again. It was last Tuesday. I was getting home from work, tired, with a takeout container under my arm, when I saw a black car parked in front of my building. A driver in a suit was waiting for me with a folder in his hands. "Are you Rafael Gomez?" he asked. I nodded, suspicious. He handed me an envelope and said only, "Your father would like to see you." I almost laughed. I wanted to tell him it was a mistake, that my father had been dead for 2 decades, but there was a photo inside the envelope. It was him. Older, yes, with completely white hair, but still with that same indecipherable look in his eyes. Along with the photo was an address and a bus ticket to a small town upstate. I stared at it for hours. I called my mom, of course. She went ballistic. "If you go, Rafael, don't bother coming back here," she said, her voice cold. It was the kind of phrase I expected to hear from her, but even so I went. The place was an old, isolated mansion, high up in the mountains. A male nurse met me at the gate. "Mr. Gomes is upstairs, but he's weak. He can't talk for long." When I walked into the room, I barely recognized the man in the bed. He was thin, breathing with difficulty, but his eyes were fixed on me as if he knew exactly what he was doing. "Rafael," he whispered, his voice raspy. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, trying to figure out what kind of game this was. He held out his hand and pointed to a folder on the dresser. "Inheritance, all yours. But I need you." I picked up the folder. There were documents, deeds, bank accounts, all in my name. But there was a condition, provided that Rafael agrees to take care of my wife, Cecilia, until the end of her life. And that's when the shock hit me like a punch. "Wife?" He nodded, with difficulty. A nurse came into the room and signaled that the visit was over. But before I left, he murmured something that sent a chill down my spine. She doesn't know who you are." I went downstairs in a daze, the folder in my hands and my head spinning. My mom spent my whole life telling me my father left us for some random mistress. And now here I was, in his house, hearing that this other woman was dying, and that I had to take care of her. I left the mansion without saying anything, just to get some air. I stood outside, looking at the pristine garden, the cloudy sky, trying to absorb the absurdity of the situation. One of the staff approached discreetly. "Are you Mr. Rafael? Mrs. Cecilia is in the back room. She's sleeping now, but she wakes up around 5. My mouth went dry. Does she know I'm here?" He hesitated for a second. "No. She hasn't been aware of much lately. I should have just left right then, thrown that folder in the trash and forgotten that this man ever existed. But a part of me wanted to know more, not about him, about her. Who was Cecilia? What did she know about my father? How was it possible that she didn't know who I was? At 5:15, I went back inside. The nurse guided me to the back room. The door was ajar. I pushed it open slowly. She was lying down, looking out the window, a knitted blanket over her legs. She was thin but elegant. She had a fragile air about her, but she didn't seem as debilitated as I had imagined. She turned around slowly and smiled. "Oh, you must be the new caregiver, right?" I swallowed hard. I nodded. "I am." She looked me over with her eyes, as if she was trying to remember if she had ever seen me before. "You have a familiar look, but it must be my imagination. With age, I start to see ghosts where there aren't any." I sat in the armchair next to the bed. "And how are you feeling today, Mrs. Cecilia? You can call me Cecilia. I hate formalities." She smiled again, but there was sadness in her eyes. "Today I'm well. I mean, as well as someone who's dying can be." I was silent. Her frankness took me by surprise. "Do you know what I have?" she continued. "No. Nobody has explained it to me yet." She turned her face back to the window. "Cancer. Stage 4. I've tried every kind of treatment. Now it's just a matter of waiting." My stomach turned. She seemed more lucid than anyone else here. "What's your name?" "Rafael." She nodded slowly, savoring the name as if she was trying to fit it somewhere in her memory. "Nice name. I knew a Rafael many years ago, a sweet, quiet little boy. I think he was the son of a friend of my husband's, but maybe I'm getting things confused." I felt my blood run cold. She was talking about me, but she had no idea. I stayed with her for another hour, listening to her disjointed stories about travel, plants, wine, and old movies. She had a melancholic charm, as if she was always on the verge of revealing a secret, but never quite got there. On my way out, I found the nurse in the hallway. "She seems very lucid for someone with a terminal illness." He looked at me seriously. "She has lapses. Sometimes she remembers everything. Sometimes she doesn't even recognize her own voice. And there are some things she can't know." "What do you mean?" He lowered his voice. Your father instructed us not to tell her anything about the past. Not about you or your mother. She believes in a sanitized version of the story, shall we say. What version? He hesitated. That she and Mr. Gomes were married for decades, and that he only had children who died very young. She believes that they were never separated, that she was the only woman in his life. I felt a lump in my throat. That was a huge lie, but she believed it. She lived inside this comforting illusion, and now I was here, as a stranger. Or perhaps worse, as a reminder of what she never knew. I went back to the guest house where I was staying. I spent the night staring at the inheritance folder, reading clauses and amounts that seemed surreal. It was millions. Land, stocks, properties. But it would only be mine if I took care of her until the end. And to do that, I would have to continue being a ghost, pretend I wasn't who I was, lie every day. And the worst part? A part of me wanted to do it, but the truth always finds a way to surface. The next morning I went back to his house, or rather, to her house. It was strange to think of it that way, but the mansion had her touch everywhere. The floral curtains, the old picture frames, the delicately cared-for potted plants. This wasn't a temporary home. It was the world where she believed she had lived her whole life with my father. A carefully constructed lie, with layers that I hadn't even begun to understand. Cecilia welcomed me with a warm smile. Raphael, I had a strange dream about you last night. You were a child, you know. My stomach dropped. I smiled back, trying to act natural. Must be a coincidence. Maybe. But in the dream, you were crying a lot. You were in a playground, holding a toy car, and you called me Aunt Sissa. Aunt Sissa. Only someone from my childhood could have come up with that nickname. She knew me. For real. But for some reason, she blocked it out or was induced to forget. I spent the day helping with her medication, reading to her, and making tea. She enjoyed my company. And, against my will, I was starting to enjoy hers, too. During lunch, while I was helping her cut her food, she said something that took me by surprise. Did you know Augusto proposed to me in Paris? I stopped mid-motion. Augusto? My father. The name sounded strange coming from her mouth with such affection. I didn't. It was in 2005, at the top of the Eiffel Tower. I was wearing a blue dress, and he was so nervous. He looked like a teenager. It was the happiest day of my life, the year he disappeared. I did the math. If he proposed to her that year, it meant he was with her at the same time he was with me and my mom. He didn't leave to be with Cecilia later. He was already with her before. Did you get married in Paris? I asked, trying to hide the anger in my voice. She laughed, a little breathlessly. No. We came back to Brazil and did everything here. Simple. Just the two of us. He said he wanted to start a new life, far from everything that tied him to the past. The phrase kept hammering in my head. Far from everything that tied him to the past. Me. My mom. Our house, our memories. My father erased everything as if it were a bad draft. In the afternoon, while she was sleeping, I went up to his office. I locked the door behind me. There were shelves of books, old folders, boxes of documents, all neatly hidden. I started to search. I don't know exactly what I was looking for, but I knew there was something there they hadn't told me about. After half an hour, I found a wooden box at the back of the cabinet. Inside were old photos. Some were torn. Others had dates written on the back. One of them was of me, around 7 years old, on his shoulders, smiling. The photo was crumpled but not torn. On the back it said, Raphael, my little boy, forgive me. And then I found something that chilled me to the bone. A letter, addressed to Cecilia. Sissa, if you ever find this letter, it's because my time has run out. There's something I need to tell you, but I never had the courage. Raphael, the boy you sometimes dream of, the one you call your nephew from the past, he's my son. And maybe he's yours too, not by blood, but by heart. He knew you as a child, before everything fell apart. I left him to be with you, and every day I wonder if I made the right choice. I froze. I felt my hand shake with the paper. She knew. Deep down, somewhere in her mind, she knew. Or maybe she was trying to forget. That night, as I was closing the curtains in her room, Cecilia looked at me and said with a strange glint in her eyes, You look a lot like him when he was young. The same look of disguised pain. I was paralyzed. Who? The son he lost. She smiled sadly. The one he said he left behind to protect me. That phrase hit me like a physical blow. He left him behind to protect me. Was that the story he told her? That he abandoned me out of love for her? I didn't know what was worse, being replaced or being turned into a comforting lie. But now, with him on his deathbed and her so close to the end, the truth was suffocating me, and I knew I wouldn't be able to stay silent for much longer. I didn't sleep well that night. The image of the letter wouldn't leave my mind. His words, that pathetic attempt to justify the unforgivable, hammered in my head as if they were screams. Maybe he's yours too, not by blood, but by heart. I didn't want this kind of late affection. I didn't want the recognition of a father who only remembered I existed when death came knocking. But most of all, I didn't want to be the link that held together the lie of two messed up lives. The next morning, I went straight to his room. He was still alive, but weak, breathing with the help of machines. I sat down next to the bed. I found the letter, I murmured. His eyes moved slowly to me. There was no surprise, just a silent acceptance. She has the right to know, I continued. And I have the right to be acknowledged as your son, not as a stranger paid with an inheritance to take care of the woman who destroyed my family. He tried to speak, but only a hoarse sound came out, almost a moan. Don't look at me like that, I said, trying to control my anger. You had 20 years, 20, and you chose to be silent. Now you want me to pretend none of this happened? To accept your fortune as a consolation prize? He blinked slowly, a gesture that was almost imperceptible. I didn't know if it was an apology or a last plea to keep everything hidden, but my silence was cracking. That afternoon, Cecilia called me to the garden. She had an album in her lap, full of old photos. Do you remember this? She asked, pointing to a black and white photo of a beach. I nodded, even though I didn't know what to say. That was the first time Augusto talked about having kids. He said he always wanted a boy, strong, quiet, just like him. She turned the page. It was a photo of him when he was younger, with a baby in his arms. This isn't the Raphael from the letter, she said thoughtfully. I froze. What letter? She smiled melancholically. One I found years ago, but then it disappeared. It said he had a son before me, that he had left this son behind. Sometimes I think I made up that story, but the name stuck in my head. I looked into her eyes. For the first time, I saw cracks. She knew. But she had learned to ignore it. What if I told you that the Raphael from the letter is me? She just stared at me. The wind rustled her white hair. The silence was so deep that I started to doubt I had spoken out loud. What? I am Augusto's son, Raphael. The one from the letter, the one he left behind. She let the album fall into her lap. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. She just sat there, in shock. That can't be, she stammered. He said you had died, that it was an accident, that there was no one else. He lied. She put her hand to her mouth. My God. Suddenly, she started to tremble, her whole body. Her breathing became ragged. I ran to get the nurse. In seconds, a team was around her, administering tranquilizers, adjusting the oxygen. She didn't look at me again. She turned her face to the other side of the bed, as if she wanted to disappear. I stayed outside, waiting for news. One of the doctors came out and looked at me. What did you say to her? The truth. Well, then you'll have to deal with the consequences. Her emotional state is fragile. Any shock can accelerate her condition. The next crisis could be the last. I took a deep breath, swallowing the guilt like it was poison. The truth had come out, and it was killing someone for the second time. I sat on the porch for hours, not knowing what to do. The sun began to set, staining the sky orange, and I was still there, paralyzed by guilt. I wanted the truth. I had wanted it my whole life, but I never imagined it would hurt so much. In the early evening, the nurse came to me. She's calmer now, but she asked to see you. I stood up slowly. Each step to the room felt heavier than the last. When I went in, her eyes were fixed on the ceiling, pale but awake. Raphael, she said, without emotion. Close the door, please. I did. Sit down. We need to talk. I obeyed in silence. The room seemed smaller now, as if the air were denser. I knew, she began. Deep down, I always knew he was hiding something much bigger than he admitted, but I clung to the story he told me. Because it was easier, because it made me feel special. She turned her head slowly and looked at me. And now, you're here. In the flesh. His son. The fruit of the life he tried to erase. I couldn't say anything. I just kept staring at that face full of pain and dignity. When he told me about the lost child, I didn't know if it was real. But even so, I felt guilty. Because I was the reason. I was the reason he disappeared. He chose to. I replied, my voice low. You didn't take him from me. He let himself be led away. She nodded slowly. Even so, I became an accomplice. I accepted the comfortable version. And now, I see how much you're carrying on your back. We were silent for a few minutes. Then she said something that caught me off guard. Are you still going to accept the inheritance? I don't know. You should. I frowned. I thought you'd be against it. No. She sighed. You deserve it. Much more than I deserve the life I led with him. You were the price he paid to live with me. But now, all of this ends with you, Cecilia. I don't want the money. I wanted my father. She closed her eyes. A tear rolled down. I wanted him too, but I don't think either of us really had him. I stayed there for a while, just holding her hand. For the first time, without hatred, without resentment, just sadness. Before I left, she said something I'll never forget. Raphael, you were the only son he ever truly had, and now, you're the only chance that something good about him will remain in this world. That night, I went back to my father's room. He was still breathing with difficulty, his eyes half closed. I approached him. I told her. He blinked once. There was no anger, no relief, just exhaustion. She knows who I am now, and yet, she called me his son. He moved his hand slowly, trying to reach mine. I took his hand. It was cold, weak. I don't forgive you, I said, but I'll take care of her until the end. He squeezed my fingers with the little strength he had left, and there, In that silence full of unsaid things, I knew that was the closest thing to an "I'm sorry" I would get. In the days that followed, something changed between Cecilia and me. We didn't talk much about the past. I think she was still processing it, but there was a new kind of silence between us, a silence that no longer hurt, that didn't demand immediate answers. It was as if the truth had leveled us. It had taken away the roles of victim and villain and left behind two survivors of the same lie. My father was still on the verge of death. His body resisted longer than anyone expected, but his soul seemed to have already left. He spent most of his time sleeping. When he was awake, he didn't speak. He just watched. And me? I was still there, caught between my duty, my dormant anger, and a strange compassion for a woman I would have hated without a second thought years ago. On a Friday afternoon, Cecilia called me into her room. She had an envelope in her hands. "This is for you," she said, carefully handing it to me. "I asked a lawyer to bring it yesterday. It's in my name, but I want you to have it." "What is it?" "My properties. I have a country house in Visconde de Mauá, 2 houses in Teresópolis, and an apartment in Rio. They're all paid for, and now they're yours." I shook my head, confused. "No, Cecilia, I can't accept this. Are you going to refuse this too? You people have a habit of wanting to carry guilt around like it's a trophy." She smiled faintly. "Listen, Raphael, this isn't about money. It's about a legacy, about giving you what should have been yours all along." I sat on the side of the bed, trying to digest it. She rested her hand on mine. "I can't change the past, and I know I'll never be a mother figure to you, but in a twisted way, I loved that man, even with all the lies, even with all the ghosts. And you're the most real part of him that's left, Cecilia. No. Listen," she squeezed my hand. "You're not just the heir of an absent man. You're proof that he existed, and that deep down, he cared, even if he didn't know how to show it." It was the first time I cried in front of her, not because of the money, not because of the acknowledgement, but because for the first time in my life, someone was telling me that I mattered. That night, as I was tidying up her medication, I heard a noise coming from my father's room. One of the monitors was beeping, insistently. I ran. He was motionless, his eyes closed, his breathing stopped. The nurse came in right behind me. He checked his vitals. He looked at me and just shook his head. My father was dead. I stood there, staring at the body. A man who carried so many secrets, so many bad choices, and who now carried nothing at all. Cecilia appeared at the door, leaning on the frame, fragile. "He's gone?" I nodded. She walked to the bed with effort and held his hand for a few seconds. Then she turned to me. "Bury him as he deserves, but live as you deserve. Promise me?" I promised, even without knowing at the time that this promise would change everything. The burial was simple, almost solitary. Few people in that city knew of my father's existence. A few neighbors from the area, 2 lawyers, and a quiet man who said he had been his partner in a failed winery project. Cecilia couldn't go. Her health wouldn't allow her to be out of bed for more than 15 minutes. Even so, she asked me to place a white flower on the coffin for her. I did. But not for him. I did it for myself, because that moment wasn't about grieving a father. It was about burying the man who had shaped my life through his absence. It was about ending the cycle of silence, anger, and resentment that had been eating at me since I was 8 years old. The next day, the lawyer called me in for a final reading of the will. The inheritance was immense, the material part at least. There were accounts in 3 countries, investments in startups, properties I didn't even know he owned. But the strangest part was the video. "He recorded this 2 weeks before he died," the lawyer said, handing me a flash drive. "It's personal, just for you." I went back to the mansion and put the video on the office TV. The image was shaky. He was pale, with visible tubes, but his eyes were clear, focused. "Raphael, if you're watching this, it's because I'm gone. And if you've made it this far, it's because you decided to take care of her. Thank you. I don't expect forgiveness or affection, just that you understand that, at the time, I was weak, scared. I hid behind passion, the promise of a new life, and I ran away. I ran away from you, from your mother, from myself. But I never stopped keeping up with you. I knew about everything. Your grades in school, your college, that first job downtown. I sent money, discreetly, to your mother, even though I knew she would never tell you. I know none of this makes up for it, but knowing that you survived me is what gave me some peace in the end." The screen went dark. I stayed there, staring at nothing. For some reason, those words didn't comfort me. They didn't soften the pain, but maybe they served to lift the weight he himself had been carrying. And for that alone, I decided to keep them with me. Not as an excuse, but as a record. The following week, Cecilia got worse. The pain increased. The memory lapses became more frequent, and sometimes she would call me my boy, not really knowing who she was talking to. Taking care of her stopped being a condition of the inheritance. It became a choice, and an emotional necessity that I didn't expect to feel. On a rainy Sunday, between doses of morphine, she called me close to her bed. "Raphael, there's something I need to do before I go. Tell me." She took a deep, difficult breath. "Your mother. I want to see her. Or at least, Ask for her forgiveness. My heart pounded. Cecilia, I don't know if that's a good idea. I don't want peace for myself. I want to give peace to her, even if she spits in my face. But she has the right to see me before the end. I was silent. This was a minefield. My mom still sent me short, cold messages when she replied. Ever since she found out I had gone to see my father, contact had practically ceased. I'll think about it, I replied, because that was the most I could promise. And that night, I called my mom. She answered after 5 rings. The silence between us was the heaviest of all. What do you want? She asked directly. Mom, Cecilia wants to see you. The laugh she let out was bitter, almost hysterical. That woman? She wants to see me? She's dying. Good. Let her die, and let her go straight to hell where she should have never left. Mom, please, you chose to be with them, with him. Don't ask me now to ease anyone's conscience. Before I could argue, she hung up. I stared at my phone for a few minutes, trying to figure out if I was still angry at her, or just tired of being the son stuck in the middle of 2 emotional disasters. I went back to Cecilia's room. She was awake, waiting. So? She didn't want to. She said difficult things. Cecilia just closed her eyes. No tears, no sigh, just a pained silence from someone who already expected it. It's okay, she said. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't come in this life, but you can carry something different. I stood beside her for a while, not knowing what to say, because at that moment, all I carried was the weight of their choices and the growing fear that I was becoming just like them. A week after the call with my mom, I received a letter. Yes. A letter, handwritten on yellowed paper with a script I knew so well. It was from her. Raphael, you asked me for something I never imagined I'd ever be capable of even considering. Seeing the face of the woman who destroyed my family. For days, just thinking about it, I trembled with rage. But then I remembered the boy you were, how much you suffered. And I realized that maybe this meeting isn't about me or about her, but about you. About what you need to close in order to move on. If it still makes sense, I'll go. One time, for you. I stood there with the letter in my hands, unable to breathe for a moment. I immediately called her. She answered with her usual cold tone. It'll be on Saturday, but don't expect me to hug anyone. I don't expect anything, Mom. Just thank you. Don't thank me. I'm doing this for you. Only for you. She hung up before I could say anything else. On Saturday, I tidied everything up in the house. Cecilia's room was aired out, clean, with fresh flowers on the table. She insisted on wearing a blue dress, the same one she said she wore when she was proposed to in Paris. She was weak, but alert. Around 3 in the afternoon, I heard a car stop at the gate. I went down to meet my mom at the entrance. She was thinner, her hair almost all white, and her eyes hardened by time. The house is beautiful, she said, looking around. For a house built on lies. I didn't answer. I just led the way. When we entered the room, Cecilia turned around slowly. Time seemed to stand still. You, my mom whispered, you still look the same. Cecilia forced a weak smile. And you, too. Stronger than I remember. The silence between the two of them was suffocating. I almost asked them to leave, to give up. But then Cecilia spoke. I didn't come to ask for forgiveness. Not because I don't think I should, but because I know this can't be fixed with words. I came to face it. What I did. What we were. My mom approached slowly. You knew he had a family. You knew he had a son. But still, I knew. Cecilia interrupted, and I chose to ignore it. I deluded myself into thinking he was unhappy, that you didn't love him like I did, and maybe he let me believe that because it was easier than him having to take responsibility for who he really was. He was a coward, my mom spat the words, and you both deserve the regret. Cecilia nodded with a thread of dignity. I agree. My mom took a deep breath. For a moment, I thought she would raise her voice or storm out, but she just sat in the armchair and stayed there in silence. The 3 of us were in the room for almost an hour. Few words were spoken, but there was something there, different. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. In the end, my mom got up. She looked at me. I've done my part. Before leaving, she turned to Cecilia one last time. You're lucky to have Raphael by your side. I wouldn't have that kind of generosity. Cecilia smiled with tears in her eyes. I know. After my mom left, I went back to the room. You were brave, I said. I wasn't. I was just tired of dying with so much stuck in my throat. Do you think she'll forgive you someday? It doesn't matter. What matters is that she came, that she looked me in the eyes, and that you brought us together, even without meaning to. I sat on the side of the bed, and she held my hand again. Raphael, it doesn't matter what you do with the inheritance, with the houses, with the money, but please, don't live the way he did. Don't hide who you are from the people you love. Never abandon your story. I was silent because those words hurt. Maybe because deep down, I knew I was doing exactly that. After that meeting between my mom and Cecilia, something shifted inside me. I don't know if it was the shock of seeing them together or the way the two of them carried the weight of that story, but I realized I was at my breaking point, not emotionally. That had been true for a while, but at the breaking point between just being another victim of other people's choices or taking control of my own life. The only problem was, what life? Because in all this time I was caught up in the past, with secrets, with this poisoned inheritance, I realized I had left my own story frozen. My job? I quit when I was called to the countryside. I said it was temporary, but I never went back. Relationships? None. Not even superficial ones. I had distanced myself from everything and everyone. My life was trapped inside that house, revolving around a dying woman and a man who had been dead inside for 20 years. The following week, I started getting calls from lawyers, real estate agents, banks, all of them anxious to know what I would do with the inheritance. They wanted to invest, sell, multiply, but I didn't know what to do with any of it. Unsure, I started visiting the places. The country house in Visconde de Mauá was beautiful. It had a peaceful energy that contrasted with everything I had been living through. The houses in Teresópolis were rented out, but well kept. In the apartment in Rio, I found something curious, a locked cabinet with a handwritten label. RG. My eyes froze, my initials. I opened the cabinet with the key that came with the documents. Inside were boxes of my own memorabilia, photos, school report cards, childhood drawings, even a cassette tape recording of a recital I did when I was 9. He had kept everything. Every piece of my childhood he didn't live. He collected as if he was trying to stay connected to something he didn't deserve. I went back to the mansion feeling even more confused. When I walked in, Cecilia looked at me differently. You saw it, didn't you? I nodded. Why did he keep everything? Because he hated himself more than you can imagine. And deep down, he loved you more than he knew how to show. Love doesn't just disappear for 20 years, Cecilia, she sighed. It doesn't disappear, but it hides. It sabotages itself. It disguises itself as fear. I was silent, but something about what she said hit me. She continued, You know, Raphael, you're afraid of repeating his mistakes, but sometimes, the fear of repeating is exactly what makes us repeat them. I frowned. How so? You've pushed everything away. You've closed yourself off. You live in this house like a ghost. You don't allow yourself to love or trust or open up, just like he did. Thinking that protecting yourself is the only way not to hurt anyone. But I don't want to hurt anyone, and that's why you're hurting yourself. She touched my hand. You can still do things differently. That night, I spent hours staring at my phone. There was a message from an ex-girlfriend, Natalia, that I never answered. She had reached out weeks before, saying she had heard about my father's death. She wanted to know if I was okay. She deserved at least a reply. I took a deep breath and typed, Hi, Nat. I'm trying to be okay. There's a lot to tell, but if you still want to listen, I'd love to talk. The message was seen in seconds. Then the reply came, I still do. Let me know when. I smiled. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I was starting over. Not because the past was resolved, but because finally, I had stopped running from it. I went back to Cecilia's room before bed. Her eyes were already closed, but she smiled when she felt my presence. You sent the message, didn't you? I did. Good choice, now there's one more. What's that? She opened her eyes slowly, with difficulty now. Decide what you're going to do with all of this. The house, the money, the story. I still don't know. She smiled. You'll know. Just don't wait too long. Time always runs out. And for the first time since I arrived, I felt like the end was near. 3 days later, Cecilia's condition visibly worsened. Her breathing was weaker. Her lucidity came in brief spurts, and each sentence seemed to demand a strength her body no longer had. The doctor was direct. It's a matter of days, maybe hours. I didn't know how to react. For all this time, taking care of her had become routine. And routine, when you get attached, becomes a sanctuary. I no longer remembered what it was like to wake up without having to prepare her medicine, check her blood pressure, or warm up her tea at 5 in the afternoon. More than that, I no longer remembered what it was like to live without that calm, sad gaze waiting for me in the room. On Wednesday morning, when I went in, she was awake, but different. Her gaze was fixed, more distant. I sat next to her, as I always did, but this time, she didn't smile. Raphael, I'm here. Don't let all of this become just another wound, okay? It won't. Promise? I promise. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes. She mumbled something I could barely hear. You were my son too. Even if it was too late, that sentence broke me. Because I knew she wasn't just speaking out of affection. She was speaking with regret, with the pain of someone who realized too late what could have been different. We stayed there, in silence, until her breathing became irregular. I called the nurse. The machine started beeping. Everything happened slowly and quickly at the same time. At 10:47 that morning, Cecilia died, and with her, I felt that a part of the weight of my past was buried too. The house became empty, frighteningly silent. In the days that followed, everything was a whirlwind. Documents, cremation, notary, estate division. Cecilia had left a supplementary will with a final letter. Raphael, I don't know if I'll be alive when this reaches you, but if I am, I'll probably be very close to the end, and I want you to know you were my last truth. Everything I built on the basis of illusions collapsed the moment you appeared, but ironically, that's when I felt most at peace. You don't have to keep this house or the assets, but if you want to, it can be a new beginning, a sanctuary, or a symbol. Whatever it is for you, it will be right. I trust whatever you decide. I cried reading that letter. I cried like I hadn't even at my father's funeral. Because of all the people involved in that messy life, Cecilia was the only one who chose to face the end head on, without running away, without begging for forgiveness on her knees, without making herself a victim, just acknowledging, accepting, and letting me decide what to do with the wreckage. Days later, I sat in the mansion's garden with Natalia. She came to visit me, and it was as if time had stopped between us. All of this is so strange, she said, looking around. This house, this story, you being here. I know. And what are you going to do now? I took a deep breath. I still don't know, but I'm thinking of turning the house into something new. Like what? A care center for the elderly, or maybe for young people who've been abandoned. I'm still figuring it out, but I want this place to stop being just a museum of secrets. She smiled. She placed her hand on mine. You're different, Rafa. I'm trying to be. For the first time. For real. We were silent for a while. The wind rustled the trees. The late afternoon light made everything golden. Peace. That's what I felt. And not because everything was resolved, but because I had finally stopped running. Because now, the past no longer dictated who I was. The next few months were a time of transition. I sold some of the properties, not out of attachment or rejection, but because I understood that part of moving on was making room. I kept the mansion, and with the help of Natalia and a small group of volunteers, I began to transform it. I named the project Casa Sisa, in her honor. It sounded strange, I know, to honor the woman who lived with the man who abandoned me, but Cecilia was more than that. She saw me. She acknowledged me. She welcomed me when she herself was already broken inside. And, above all, she let me choose. Casa Sisa started as a loose idea, but it took shape quickly. The local community got involved, donations came in, and soon we had organized rooms, partner doctors, and emotional care workshops. A place where no one would be left behind like I was, where no one would be forgotten like she was. But of course, the past doesn't just disappear because we decide to move on. One afternoon, while I was organizing old papers that were still in my father's office, I found a box with sealed documents, papers from the time he and my mother were still married, contracts, bank records, and a separate folder with my mother's name handwritten on it. Inside were letters, more than 20 of them, all from Cecilia. The first was dated 2004, a year before he disappeared. Dear Marisa, I know this letter will never be read, but I'm writing it anyway, because I'm in love with the man you share your life with, and I know that's cruel, but it's the truth. He talks to me about your son with eyes full of guilt, and I see him carry that weight every day. And I ask myself, who am I to want a man who carries a child like a debt? I know you would hate me, maybe with good reason, but please allow me at least this moment of sincerity. I don't want to steal him. I just want to love him in a way that he stops hating himself. I kept reading the others. Most were never sent, written just for herself, or perhaps as an attempt to get things off her chest. In one of them, Cecilia reveals something that stopped me in my tracks. He promised me he would talk to you, that he would explain, but I know he never had the courage, and I know that one day, if your son ever meets me, he'll hate me, and he'll have every right to. She knew. She knew all along that she was part of something terrible. But what shocked me the most was realizing that she wasn't the cold woman my mother described. For a long time, she was a confused accomplice, yes. But she was also a woman who had been deceived, fed promises by a man torn between love and cowardice. I closed the box, took a deep breath, and went out to the backyard. I burned the letters right there, not because I wanted to erase history, but because I no longer wanted anyone to be trapped by it. That night, I sent a message to my mom. Casa Sisa is open. If you ever want to see it, you're always welcome. No past, no pressure, just to see what all of this has become. She saw it. She didn't reply, but days later, an anonymous donation appeared in the project's account, a high amount, much higher than normal, and along with it, a delivery to the mansion's address, a vase of white flowers, no note, but with a single inscription on the card, peace. I looked at it and smiled, not out of victory, not out of reconciliation, but because I finally understood that sometimes forgiveness doesn't need words, it just needs space and time. Months passed since I opened Casa Sisa. The place became more than a project. It became my compass, my purpose. Every elderly person we cared for, every story we shared, was like I was giving back to the world a part of what had been taken from me. But the curious thing was realizing that while I was rebuilding that place, I was also rebuilding myself. Natalia was still around, first as a visitor, then as a volunteer, and now as something more. We didn't put labels on it. We didn't need to. What we had was light, sincere, and different from anything I had ever experienced before. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. But on a Saturday morning, while I was organizing files with the residents' names, I had an unexpected visitor, my mom. She walked in the front door without warning, as if the house already belonged to her. "I brought some winter clothes. I thought they might be useful for someone here," she said, without looking me in the eyes. "Of course. Thank you, Mom. And flowers. For the garden. The ones at the entrance are a little droopy." I smiled faintly. "You're starting to sound like the building manager now. Someone has to remind you that appearances matter, right?" We laughed. It was strange, but it felt good. We walked through the house together. I showed her the rooms, the kitchen, the workshop area. She observed everything in silence. Sometimes she commented on something, but without many words. In the end, she stopped in the hallway where Cecilia's old room was. Was this her room? It was. She looked at the floor. She took a deep breath. "I thought I would hate this place, but there's something here. Peace, maybe." She said she wanted it to be that, a place where no one else would be left behind. My mom nodded slowly. "And you? Are you going to stay here forever?" "I don't know. For now, yes, but I'm starting to understand that my place isn't a place of escape anymore. It's where I choose to be. And today, that's here." She looked at me, for the first time, with a silent pride. One she never said with words, but that was there. "You did a good thing, Raphael. You too. Coming here is more than I ever thought would happen." She was silent, but before she left, she said something that broke me down. "I never knew how to deal with what happened. I always thought that losing you to your father was the worst thing that could happen. But now I see that I almost lost you to yourself." "What do you mean?" "That you were fading away, and now you're shining. Not as Augusto's son, but as yourself." We hugged. It was short and timid, but it was the first real hug we had given each other in years. After she left, I went back to the garden. Natalia was sitting under the shade of the mango tree, helping an elderly woman paint a vase. I sat down next to them. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Better than I ever imagined." We stayed there for a few minutes in silence, until Natalia turned to me with that look only she has. "Have you ever thought about really starting over?" "What do you mean?" "Leaving here, traveling, doing something that has nothing to do with the past." I took a deep breath. "I have. But I was afraid I would be running away again. And now? Now I think maybe that's exactly what I need. Not to run away, but to go." She smiled. "Then let's go." "Let's go? Why not?" "Take your story with you, Rafa, but don't carry it like an anchor. Carry it like baggage, to remember where you came from, not to stop you from where you can go." In that moment, I realized that maybe the greatest legacy my father left me was the life he didn't live, and that I could do things differently, not to prove anything to anyone, but because finally, I wanted to live. A few months after that conversation in the garden, I packed my bags. It was strange to think that I was leaving Casa Sisa, the place where everything had started over, but it wasn't an abandonment. It was a transition, growth. We had built a solid team, people who understood the mission, who felt what that place meant, and most importantly, who no longer saw me as the son of the missing man or the caregiver of the dying widow. I was Raphael, the guy who rebuilt ruins and planted hope on top of them. The trip started as a simple idea: hit the road with Natalia with no fixed plans, see Brazil in a way we never had before, cheap guest houses, back roads, small towns. But it soon became something bigger. We started documenting everything: the people we met, the stories we heard, the places that surprised us. We created a YouTube channel, a simple name: Between Stops. At first, nobody watched, but little by little, the stories began to touch people. We talked about rebuilding, about reunions, about forgiveness, and without meaning to, I was doing for strangers what I was never able to do for myself for so long: listen. One day, we stopped in a small town in southern Minas Gerais. In a cafe, an older woman recognized us. "You're the young man from Casa Sisa, right? The one from the video with the story about your mom and your father's wife." I nodded, a little embarrassed. That video, made by a journalist who visited the project, had unexpectedly gone viral months before. That story made me call my son. We hadn't spoken in 4 years. Now he texts me every day. "Thank you." That kept pounding in my head. Not the thank you, but the fact that, even without wanting to, my chaos was helping other people put themselves back together. It was then that I realized the true inheritance wasn't the house or the money or the assets. It was the ability to transform pain into a bridge, silence into a voice, and weight into purpose. On one of the nights of the trip, we camped at a small town's lookout point. The sky was absurdly full of stars. Natalia and I lay on a blanket, hands intertwined. "Do you think you'll ever want to stop?" she asked. "Stop traveling?" Stop starting over. I was silent, thinking. I think so, but not out of tiredness, out of completeness. And where would that place be? I looked at her. I smiled. Where I can look in the mirror and no longer see an abandoned boy. She squeezed my hand. You haven't been that boy for a long time, Rafa. You just need to believe it. We stayed there in silence for long minutes. No words, no promises, just a quiet certainty. We had survived, and now we were living. 2 years had passed since I left Casa Tisa. 2 years of traveling, of meetings, of stories that weren't mine, but that in some way were healing me too. Between Stops was now a channel with thousands of subscribers. It wasn't viral because of hype, but because of truth, because it brought to light voices that had never been heard. Stories of ordinary people like mine, like my father's, like Cecilia's, like my mom's. Yes, my mom. We talk more often now. The conversations are still short, sometimes harsh, but sincere. And every once in a while, she even comments on the videos. You seem more whole. You still look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders, but with less anger about it. It was the most direct compliment she had given me in years. Natalia and I are still together, strong. We've learned to respect each other's space, our silences, our bad days. Because the love that's born after pain is more mature, more conscious. And it was with her that I made the decision that brought me here, to come back. Not out of nostalgia, but out of closure. Casa Sisa now had a new, more modern headquarters on a bigger piece of land donated by one of the project's supporters. The original mansion where it all began had been closed, abandoned, just like before. But now, it was time to open the doors again. I arrived alone, key in my pocket, my heart pounding. I pushed open the gate and was flooded with memories. Every corner still held something, a whisper from the past. But strangely, it didn't hurt anymore. I went into my father's old office. The chair where he used to sit was still there. The bookshelf was untouched. The crooked painting that Cecilia always complained about was still hanging there. I sat down. I closed my eyes. And for the first time in this whole journey, I spoke out loud. Dad, I forgive you. I said it without pain, without drama, just with a feeling of lightness, because in that instant, I realized that holding a grudge for so long was like trying to punish the past, and that never works. The only way to overcome it is to move beyond it. I went back to the garden. I took a small plaque I had brought with me and buried it in the ground, next to the tree where Cecilia used to sit. On it was written, "Here the end was born, and here everything began." I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. Peace. This time, it was real. A few weeks later, I posted the most personal video on the channel. I told everything. From my father's disappearance to the unusual request he made, from living with Cecilia to reconnecting with my mom, the death, the letters, the choice to stay, and then the choice to go. I ended with a sentence that took me 20 years to understand. I didn't just inherit a fortune. I inherited scars, lies, broken promises, but I also inherited the chance to turn all of it into something worthwhile. And if you, who are watching this, carry a similar story, know that you don't have to be defined by it. You can rewrite it, even if it hurts, even if it takes time. You can start over, as many times as you need to. The video went viral, but what touched me the most wasn't the numbers, it was the messages. Hundreds of them. People who decided to call their parents, visit a grandparent, forgive a sibling, go back home. And reading each one, I understood. My father left me much more than he ever knew. A year after the reopening of the old mansion, I came back not as a visitor or as the son of the previous owner, but as a host. Casa Chisa was now operating in that space as a cultural and therapeutic center, a place of welcome not just physical, but emotional, for people who, like me once was, were lost between what they had lived and what they still didn't know how to live. The garden bloomed again. The walls were painted with light colors, with murals made by local artists, but the structure, it remained. As a reminder that we can rebuild without erasing who we were. My mom came to the inauguration. She said she wouldn't stay long, but she did, until the end. She made a point of planting a tree in the backyard, an IPE tree. She said she had always wanted to plant one, but never had the right place. I think you do now. I just smiled. Natalia was by my side, as always. Strong, present, but not taking up space that wasn't hers. We no longer needed to prove anything to each other. We just were. During the event, I was asked to say a few words. I went up to the small stage, took a deep breath, and spoke, looking everyone in the eye. For a long time, this house was a symbol of abandonment to me, of lies, of pain. But today, it's a symbol of choice, of courage. Because everyone here had to face something they would have preferred to leave buried, and yet they chose to be here. And that, to me, is more valuable than any inheritance. Because that is a legacy. And the legacy I want to leave is this. You can rebuild. You can change the course of your story. You are not your parents' mistake, nor are you the trauma of your childhood. You are what you choose to do with all of it. And I chose to live. Applause. But the most important thing came after. An older woman approached with tears in her eyes and said, "You made me want to love my son again." After 20 years, I smiled, because that was it. It was always about what came after, not about what happened, but about what you do with it. Today, when I look at my story, I no longer see just pain. I see paths. I see versions of myself that I had to be to get here. And most importantly, I see people. Cecilia, my mom, Natalia, my father. Not as characters in conflict, but as human beings, flawed, contradictory, and, even so, lovable. Life didn't give me easy answers or perfect reconciliations, but it gave me the chance to keep going. And in the end, that's all that matters. Not that the story was perfect, but that it was lived.